ॐ सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। हरि ओम। Readings from Meditation and Spiritual Life. Chapter 7, Walking on the Razor's Edge. Our next point is wanted not physical but inner beauty. What matters most in spiritual life, our teachers tell us, is not the beauty of the physical form but the beauty of the mind, harmony of the mind. We must develop the capacity of the mind to penetrate into the deepest mystery of life. We need inner beauty, moral beauty. There is an anecdote about the President Lincoln, who was not a good-looking person. Once a Philadelphian delegation went to meet him, and they introduced one of their members, saying, "He has been good enough to paint and present to our league room a most beautiful portrait of yourself." President Lincoln thought it over, and turning to the painter said, "I presume, sir, in painting that portrait you took your idea of me from my principles and not from my person. And that is what is needed. The purity of mind and heart shines through the body. I have seen most homely persons possessing a remarkable grace that most beautiful bodies do not possess. Besides, pure and illumined souls radiate holy and harmonious vibrations, which have not only a pleasant but also an elevating influence on all those who come in touch with them. As I have already mentioned, our spiritual teachers are very much concerned about making us properly qualified to follow the higher spiritual life, for without it we cannot walk on the razor's edge. Our next point is our defects. The defects of the body, the disharmonious functioning of the body are to be removed. An ancient teacher of the Upanishads prayed with his disciples, "May all my limbs, speech, breath, eye, ear, vitality, and all senses become perfected. When this harmony is attained, we shall feel that it is a joy to live in the body." How to achieve this harmony of the members of the body? Avoid unhealthy food. Live a regulated, temperate life. Perform selfless work. Lead a moral life. Harmonious thoughts and actions make the body harmonious. The defects of the senses are to be removed by withdrawing them from evil objects and diverting them along right lines. This is not repression or suppression. Hear and see what is good, pure, spiritual. Use your senses in such a way that instead of impoverishing you, they enrich you by bringing you good food for the mind. The defects of the mind are to be got rid of by living a life guided not by impulses but by higher reason and reflection. We should avoid what is harmful and acquire what is helpful to our spiritual life. What is helpful may be very unpleasant, but still we must have it. And by following that, we succeed in removing the defects of the mind to a great extent. Our mind gives us various kinds of troubles, especially when we want to control it. We find sometimes it is too dull, it does not want to move. Sometimes it is mad, running from one thing to another. And even if the dense mind remains a little quiet sometimes, it again starts its mad course. But through training, this mad mind can be made concentrated. Our teachers tell us that our food should be pure. The food that we eat through the mouth should be pure. It should produce harmony in the body. Similarly, the food that we take through all our senses must be pure. That helps us to build up a pure, subtle body. The food that we take through our mind, all our thoughts and emotions, also should be pure to help us to build up a harmonious, subtle body. There is a Sanskrit proverb which says, even if you feed the snake with pure milk, it will manufacture only unbearable poison. That is its nature. In the same way, eating pure vegetarian food alone is not enough. Our nature must change. We should become pure, loving, and sweet tempered. Various are the defects we suffer from. Now, are we going to remove these defects one by one? Some psychologists tell us to relax the head, then relax the ears, relax the nose, relax the hands, relax the trunk, relax the feet, and so on. Some others advise us not to suppress our desires, but to go and freely express them. But in actual life, few people have got lasting benefit from such piecemeal attempts at improving oneself. Vedanta goes to the root of the matter. It deals with your whole self. Behind the ordinary self or ego, there stands the Atman, the higher self, which is the source of purity, strength, and bliss. The more you seek it and allow it to manifest itself through your actions and thoughts, the more perfect and peaceful you become. Swami Vivekananda, Sri Ramakrishna's greatest disciple, gives us the advice: teach yourself, teach everyone his real nature. Call upon the sleeping soul and see how it awakes. Power will come, glory will come, goodness will come, purity will come, and everything that is excellent will come when this sleeping soul is roused to self-conscious activity. Not to try to purify oneself limb by limb, but to try to take hold of the indivisible self. That is what Vedanta teaches. Our next point is modern psychology and morality. Nowadays, moral disciplines have come to be too much connected with repression and suppression. To use modern psychological terms, the ancient Hindu sages believed in giving a higher direction to the senses. May we hear with our ears what is pure. May we see with our eyes what is holy. May we praise and worship the Divine Spirit and enjoy with strong and steady limbs and body the life allotted to us. One really feels harmony and peace when one is a master of one's own senses, master of one's own mind. When one follows the spiritual life without conflicts and in a spontaneous way. The process of mental purification is called purgation in mystic language and sublimation in psychological terms. It is a process of giving a higher turn to the desires or primary instincts. Modern psychology has discovered a technique which was known to the ancient spiritual teachers of India in a more thorough way. In modern psychoanalytical technique, the main task is to bring into consciousness or awareness the underlying and deep-seated causes of the patient's mental troubles. Some unscrupulous psychologists may advocate a free play of the morbid tendencies in the patient, but in the words of Dr. Hartfield, an eminent psychiatrist, from the point of view of cure, the advice to go and express your instincts is foolish. In actual experience, I have never known a true neurosis cured by sexual libertinism. In the psychoanalytical method so widely practiced nowadays, the patient is asked to regard the disturbing desire in a new light and accept it wholly or in part without fear or disgust. Secondly, to face the trouble deliberately and reject it without feeling too much sense of guilt. Or third, to direct it along a higher channel to a higher goal. Dr. Adler, the founder of the School of Individual Psychology, always advocates the pursuit of what he calls a healthier style of life, useful to the community. The Hindu spiritual teacher also wants us to give a higher turn to all our passions, says Sri Ramakrishna. Direct the six passions to God. The impulse of lust should be turned into the desire to have communion with the Divine Spirit. Feel angry at those who stand in the way to God. Feel greedy for Him. If you must have the feeling of I and mine, then associate it with God. If you must have pride, then feel proud, thinking that you are a servant of God or a child of God. How truly does Dr. Adler remark? By changing our opinion of ourselves, we can also change ourselves. Swami Vivekananda said, teach yourself, teach everyone his real nature. Power will come, goodness will come, purity will come, everything that is excellent will come. The Hindu teacher goes to the very logical conclusion of this ideal, to a point beyond the scope of the ordinary psychologist. Our next point is the middle path. In our present state of consciousness, our body and mind are very much interconnected and affect each other. So, we should take care of both. Remember the story of Buddha. He became tired of the pleasures of the palace, left his home, and practiced severe asceticism. One day, as he was about to stand up, he fell down unconscious. On reviving, he heard a charming song. The string stretched breaks, and the music flies. The string its slack is dumb, and music dies. Tune us, the sitar, neither low nor high. It was then that a village woman by name Sujata came that way, and Buddha gratefully accepted the bowl of milk pudding that she offered. With his strength returned, he plunged into deep contemplation and attained illumination. Self-indulgence and self-mortification both are to be avoided. Buddha discovered the middle path of right comprehension, right living, and right meditation, avoiding the extremes of mortification and indulgence. Centuries before Buddha, Sri Krishna had preached the same message. To him who is temperate in eating and recreation, in his work, in sleep and wakefulness, yoga, that is spiritual practice, becomes a destroyer of misery. In still earlier times, the Vedic sages said, whatever food is suited to oneself that protects, it injures not. A greater quantity injures and a smaller quantity protects not. The food that we eat with our mouths must be moderate and pure. The food that we take through the other senses also must be pure. There must also be moral culture. This is the middle path. Our next point is power of concentration without purity may prove dangerous. Desires do not leave us all of a sudden. We may practice great control. We may cut ourselves off from the objects of desire, but the desire remains in the subtle form. This desire will disappear only with the dawn of spiritual consciousness, and so we should try our best to awaken in us something of this spiritual consciousness. Here is an instruction that we should try to remember always. It is dangerous to practice concentration before the attainment of minimum purity. Before we practice concentration or store up our energy, we must know how to direct this energy along higher channels. Otherwise, we may come to grief. In India, we have a parable. A man learned how to invoke a demon. He uttered some incantations, and the demon made his appearance and said, "Now give me work." He asked the demon to do certain things, and in no time those things were finished. The demon appeared again and demanded, "Give me work, otherwise I shall break your neck." And the man did not know what to do. He had called up the demon, and now he must give him some work to do. Then an idea struck him. Showing the demon a dog, he said, "Well, straighten this dog's curly tail." We call up our energy, but we do not know how to utilize it. This energy is frittered away in doing useless things, and this is a great tragedy in spiritual life. We must know how to give this energy a higher turn. Otherwise, this stored up energy may stimulate our desires, may stimulate our senses. And if we do not succeed in giving these desires a higher turn, they may become like bombshells and wreck our body and mind. It is dangerous to try to play at concentration and meditation. But if we are properly trained, if we have the necessary qualifications, it is a joy to live a life of concentration and meditation. If the energy is not properly directed, sometimes it may express itself as psychic powers. Probably we have learned to read other people's thoughts. We can know something of what is going to happen in the future, but we remain ignorant as to our own mind, as to our own spiritual nature. The ideal of spiritual life is to know what we are. If one has attained the necessary purity by following the methods described before, then this stored up energy can be used in performing selfless work, in doing japa, in practicing concentration and meditation. And all these then help us to move towards the truth. Our next point is surrender to the Supreme Being. In order to follow this spiritual path with success, the defects of the intellect and the ego also are to be removed. By persistently following the right path and strengthening the mind, the will becomes strong, and we certainly need a strong will for attaining success in spiritual life. When temptations assail us, when all the desires that lie in our subconscious mind appear before us and tempt us, we need a strong will. We must be able to follow this spiritual path, rising above all the various temptations that are sure to come to each and every one of us. And the one thing we must remember in spiritual life is this: egocentric moral and spiritual striving alone is not enough. So, the teachers of yoga, as well as the teachers of Vedanta, tell us, along with the practice of disciplines, one must also try to surrender the fruits of one's activities to Ishvara. To the yogi, he is the teacher of teachers. This teacher of teachers is not far away from us. He dwells in our heart. In the West, one does not very much appreciate God as the teacher of teachers, but in India, we do. Our parents bring us into the world, but our spiritual teachers help us to be born in the realm of the spirit and help us to go beyond birth and death, misery and sorrow. In Vedanta, God, the Supreme Spirit, is not only the teacher of teachers, but also the soul of all souls. Each one of us is a part of the infinite spirit. As our mind and heart become pure, whether in the initial stage we believe in a cosmic spirit or not, we come to get hold of our individual inner self. As we move further and further, we find that we are all really parts of a greater whole, and this is the greatest truth we need. We, as souls, are inseparable parts of the Oversoul, the Supreme Spirit. The Atman, the Upanishad declares, is hidden in the hearts of all. It is seen only by the seers through their pure, subtle intuition. A strange faculty is lying hidden in every one of us. It is a faculty by which the soul knows itself, by which it directly knows the Supreme Spirit. Through moral practices, through prayers, through meditation, this dormant faculty is to be awakened. Only then does spiritual life truly begin. It is only then that the spiritual aspirant may say he is walking on the edge of the razor. In him there awakens a great power of discrimination between the real and the unreal. And with this razor of discrimination, he removes from himself all that is not self. He cuts himself off from body consciousness, mind consciousness, and intellect consciousness. He realizes that he is the Spirit, and as the Spirit, he is an inseparable part of the Supreme Spirit, the soul of all souls. Here, having attained the highest purity, having dissociated itself from all things that are material, mental, and emotional, the soul can walk on the razor's edge and become united with the oversoul. That is what is experienced by illumined seers. Now, we may very well ask the question, what of ourselves? We can be seers not simply by wishing, but by following in the footsteps of those who realized the Supreme Spirit, who walked on the edge of the razor, who divested themselves of all that is non-spirit and realized the Supreme Spirit. Following in their footsteps, we may make a humble beginning in our spiritual life. Let us try to awaken in us the consciousness that we are the Spirit. Let us try to feel that we are all parts of the one, our soul. Let us feel that the body is our chariot, the senses are our horses, our mind the reins, and the intellect the charioteer. Let us learn to have full control over this chariot. Following in the footsteps of the illumined souls, let us possess the right understanding. Let us restrain the mind. Let us control the senses. Let us follow steadily the path of spiritual realization. Let us awake. Let us arise. Let us follow the spiritual path step by step. Let us try to realize the true self, the self of all. Let us not stop till the goal is reached. By walking on the razor's edge, by strictly following the spiritual path, let us attain illumination and bliss, and also help others to walk on the razor's edge, to follow this spiritual path and attain the same illumination and bliss. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat.